Some NBA draft classes achieved legendary status because they produced multiple Hall of Famers, such as Jordan's 1984 draft,
Michael Jordan, North Carolina,
Kobe's class of 1996, or LeBron's 2003 draft. Almost every class has at least one draftee eventually enshrined in the Hall, plus a couple of players with perennial All-Star and All-NBA selections. But then there's the
2000 NBA draft,
which has neither of those things. There have been some other bad draft classes, like the 2013 draft with Anthony Bennett, or the 2006 class with Adam Morrison.
Secrets to success. Appreciate it.
But nothing can quite compare to the lack of talent in 2000.
I'm just happy to be here.
Only 3 All-Star selections total, just 1 All-NBA selection,
I'm just happy to be a part of that story.
and a whole lot of busts. This is the story of the 2000 draft, easily the worst class in NBA history. But how horrible was it really? The 2000 draft produced 3 All-Stars: Kenyon Martin, who was the first overall pick, Jamal Magloire, who was drafted 19th, and Michael Redd, who was picked 43rd. From 1984, when Jordan got drafted, until 2020, every draft averaged 5.9 All-Star players, meaning the 2000 draft had roughly 3 All-Stars less than average. If we go further back in history, the last time there were fewer than 3 All-Star players in a draft was 1952, while the 1970 and 1974 drafts had the most All-Stars, with 12. However, the 2000 draft isn't the worst by the number of All-Stars, but by the amount of overall All-Star selections. All 3 players from the 2000 draft who made the All-Star game were selected only once, and all 3 did it in 2004. By comparison, the 1996 class had 10 players that became All-Stars, but they were selected to the All-Star team a combined 67 times, which is an NBA record. The second draft class per overall All-Star selections is the 2003 draft, whose All-Stars played in 60 All-Star games, and counting. With just 3 combined All-Star appearances, the 2000 draft is the worst of all time. Even worse than the before-mentioned 1952 draft, which only had 1 All-Star player, but he made the All-Star team 4 times. To make matters even more defeating for the 2000 class, even those 3 All-Star selections were a stretch. Sure, Michael Redd averaged 22 points per game in 2004, and his All-Star selection can't be disputed. Kenyon Martin averaged only 16.7 points, and Magloire averaged only 13.6, and they still made the All-Star team. Even though Martin's overall game was solid, especially on the defensive end, the biggest reason he got selected was because he played for the Nets, who were a championship contender. And the only reason Magloire was selected was a complete lack of competition among the East centers, when the All-Stars were selected by position and centers were guaranteed 2 spots. Kenyon Martin's 16.7 points per game were his career high, just like the 13.6 points were a career high for Magloire, who averaged just 7 points per game for his career, and is extremely lucky to call himself an All-Star. In fact, out of all 60 players drafted in 2000, only Michael Redd and Jamal Crawford ever averaged 20 points per game in a season, and Crawford did it only once. This class scored the least amount of points in the NBA, as only 9 players averaged double figures in scoring for their career. Just 4 players from this class scored more than 10,000 points total, and only 11 players scored more than 5,000 career points. The situation with other statistical categories isn't much better either. Most draft classes have at least 4 players who had more than 5,000 career rebounds, while the 2000 class only has 1, Kenyon Martin. Martin averaged just 6.8 boards per game, which by all means is not a huge number for a big man. And yet, Kmart still leads all players in his draft class, as only 4 players averaged more than 5 rebounds per game. When it comes to assists, it's the same story. Jamal Crawford leads the class with 4,541 career assists, and no other player surpassed 3,000 assists for their career. In assists per game, Speedy Claxton leads the 2000 class, but he only averaged a mediocre 4.3 assists per game, and only 3 players averaged more than 3. Shooting wasn't a strength of the class of 2000 either, as only Mike Miller shot over 40% for 3 in his career, and no other player from this class ever made an all-defensive team. So, wherever you look, the 2000 draft was historically bad. But not only did this class lack star power, it had no depth either. From 1984 to 2014, an average of 19 players per draft averaged a 10-year career in the NBA. The average length of an NBA career is just 4.5 years, and if a player survives in the league for more than a decade, that's actually a rarity and not the norm. A 10-year career means a player has signed multiple contracts, which is a sign of quality, even if they weren't all-stars or even starters. When a draft has over 20 players that have lasted for 10+ years, that means it's a deep draft. For example, the 1998 NBA draft had only 5 all-stars, but 25 players who have played a decade in the league, which is one of the best results ever. In 2003, 27 players played for 10 or more years, which is the most ever, with one of those players still going strong in year 22. The 1986 and 2006 drafts had only 13 players with a decade of experience, which puts them at the bottom of the list, while the 2000 draft had just 15 players with a decade of experience, with 16 players playing less than 5 years and 10 players who never even played in the NBA. When it comes to All-NBA selections, only one player from the 2000 class ever made an All-NBA team, and that was Michael Redd, who made the All-NBA third team in 2004. As you can probably guess by now, one All-NBA selection is the worst result for any class in NBA history. By comparison, some other weaker draft classes like the 2006 class still had 9 All-NBA selections, and the 1999 draft had 7, and the 1994 class had 4 All-NBA selections. The best drafts, like the 1996 class, have a total of 37 All-NBA selections, while the 1984 draft had a whopping 47 All-NBA nods. The same goes for the Hall of Fame. Each year, roughly 2 Hall of Famers enter the NBA on average, and there is at least one player in almost every draft who gets enshrined in Springfield. The only drafts with no Hall of Famers is the 1951 draft and this notoriously bad 2000 class. Of course, in the last 20 years, there are still some classes without a player entering the Hall, but that's mostly because the players are still active or haven't been retired long enough to get enshrined. The 2004 draft has Dwight Howard, who's a lock for the Hall of Fame, just like Chris Paul from the 2005 class. 2006 is not an absolute certainty, but LaMarcus Aldridge, Rajon Rondo, and Kyle Lowry all have a high chance of getting in. From 2007 until 2014, every class will certainly produce at least one Hall of Famer. In 2015, Devin Booker will probably make it, just like Jaylen Brown from the 2016 class. In 2017, we have Jason Tatum. In 2018, there's Luka, who's basically already a Hall of Famer, even if he stops playing right now. And in 2019, Ja Morant and Zion have a great chance of making it as long as they stay healthy, just like Anthony Edwards and Tyrese Halliburton from the 2020 draft. When it comes to championships, a total of 6 players from the 2000 draft have won an NBA ring, but only Mike Miller played a significant role in winning the title. The others were just role players, or they barely even played. But perhaps the most telling statistic of how bad this draft was is the amount of win shares. If you don't know what win shares are, the best way to describe it is that it's a statistic that attempts to divide credit for a team's success to the individuals on the team. Win shares measure players based on their offense, defense, and playing time. And even though it's a complicated formula and it favors longevity, it's a great way to value players' impact on winning for their overall career. The all-time leader in win shares is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who had a 273 rating, and he's followed by LeBron, who currently stands at 263, while Jordan rounds out the top 5 with 214 total win shares. Exactly 100 players in NBA history have amassed more than 100 win shares, and they are mostly all Hall of Famers. Players with long and productive careers, even if they never made an All-Star team, usually have a win share number over 50, and players who have modest but respectable careers have between 25 and 50 win shares. If a player has a win share number below 20, it can be viewed as having a disappointing career. Players below 10 are just obvious absolute busts. It's probably needless to say, but the 2000 draft has the lowest amount of win shares out of every class in the last 50 years. Hedo Turkoglu leads the class with just 63.3 win shares, while just 3 other players have more than 50. A total of 8 players have more than 25 win share rating, which we projected is the cutoff in impact in the NBA. By comparison, the 2013 draft, which is considered one of the worst drafts ever, still has 14 players with more than 25 win shares. The 2003 class, which has 18 players with a win share rating over 25, while the 1996 class has 17 players with a 25 win share cutoff. So, however you want to look, and whatever statistics you want to measure, the 2000 draft was the hardest on NBA general managers, as there were no great players, and just a handful of solid ones. It wasn't just that Kenyon Martin didn't quite live up to expectations that come with being drafted number 1, it's that 9 other players in the lottery can be qualified as busts. And despite Michael Redd being one of the best second-round picks of all time, 3 Sixth Man of the Year awards for Jamal Crawford, the masterful shooting stroke of Mike Miller, some great offensive years from Hedo Turkoglu, and Marco Jaric marrying Adriana Lima, in its entirety, this class will likely, forever, be the worst NBA draft of all time. Thanks for watching Nonstop. And if you like this one, subscribe and check out some of our other content.